Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, you let him rape us, I set you up. After that, my uncle took revenge on behalf of my parents. Finally, break my phone, you'll pay for the damage. Before we get into today's episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss another episode of r/ProRevenge. You let him rape us, I set you up. First, this is a throwaway account. I will not be replying to comments. Take this as you will. This is my story of my revenge against my mother and rapist. First, our father passed away 4 years before all this started. Car crash. Maybe our lives would have been better if he hadn't died that day. Also, before I get into this, one thing you should know is, before this man came into our lives, our mother was amazing. She was loving, supportive, and put us above everything. But she would soon replace us with her new man and her new meth habit. When I was around 9 and my little sister 7, our mum started dating this man. Let's call him Pose. Pose was tall and weighed about 250 pounds. He had oily, brown hair and a face filled with sores. I didn't like him from the start. He made me uncomfortable to say the least. A few months after they started dating, Pose moved into our house. Everything was okay for the first few weeks, I guess. Then my mum started to act funny. Staying up all night, not cooking us lunch or supper, not cleaning, snapping at us for no reason, and started hitting us. Our lives had been turned upside down by this man so quickly. Then one night he came into my bedroom, held me down and raped me. I was screaming and crying for my mom, begging her to come help me, to come save me please. And then I seen her, standing in the door watching him rape me. My mum was just letting him do this to me. She was just watching, like she was looking at a TV or something. When he finished, and climbed off of me, he walked up to my mum, kissed her, and walked away with her. My mum just left me, crying and bleeding. I was just raped and she allowed it to happen. Not long after they walked out, I hear them having sex in the living room. It was my 10th birthday. Happy birthday to me. A couple of nights later I hear my little sister crying. I get out the bed to find my mum standing in her doorway. I run to the room to try to help her, and my mum sees me. She backhands me across the face, making me slam against the hallway wall. I can hear my sister crying and begging, with no one coming to help her. That was the day, I started hating my mother. The rape and abuse went on for 3 years. I didn't know at the beginning, but soon found out. Pose had gotten my mum using meth. Pose and meth were the only important things in her life. My sister and I were nothing more than his play toys. I soon started noticing them arguing more and more about who got more hits. This one was stashing from the other one, and you smoked the last of it all by yourself. This is when I started planning my revenge. I noticed after about 3 days they would finally pass out, and would sleep for almost 2, and their bag of meth would always be on the bedside table, beside Pose. I know most would ask, why didn't you call the police, or child welfare, because jail wasn't enough. He might have raped us, but she betrayed us. She turned her back on us, and I wanted revenge and wanted her to suffer like we had. So every chance I got I would move the bag, just at first, make it look tampered with. Then I started taking it from the bag and placing some on my mom's table. These things alone cause a lot of fighting. They started getting physical. I would keep my sister and I out of sight when this went on, and they never lasted long. Well, I continued to do this over a couple of months, taking more and more, flushing it, or dropping it down the sink, until the last day. The last day I took the whole bag. It was a good amount. They had just reappeared like they would say. I flushed the whole bag, and locked my sister and I in my room, and quietly prayed that they didn't realize it was me. I am not sure how long after I did this that everything started, but we had watched like 3 Disney movies before they finally woke up, and then I heard him start yelling about his missing bag. The yelling got louder and more intense. Then I heard the breaking of objects. It was starting to getting bad now. I hear my mum go from angry to scared. I hear him hitting her begging him to stop, swearing she didn't touch it. He continues to hit and she continues to beg. Begging him to stop hurting her. Begging someone to come help her. Begging like we begged her for so many nights. My sister started asking to leave. She was scared and crying. I opened my window, put my sister outside and followed. We ran to the neighbors and told them that Pose was beating our mom. The neighbor called the police and brought us inside. And we watched as the police pulled up to our house. Start to walk up to the door, stop for a second and then started yelling police, and kicked the door open. After what felt like forever, we see Pose being brought out to the police car. I wait to see my mum follow, but she doesn't. I see an ambulance pull up and the paramedics run in the gurney. A short time later I see them rushing back with my mom. I catch a glimpse of her once beautiful face, now looking like ground meat. Her face was solid red, covered in blood. She ended up dying on the way to the hospital. I never planned to have my mother killed. I just wanted her to feel the pain we had been feeling for these last years. And I guess in the end she did. She felt the pain and terror we felt every night for the last 3 years. She just felt it all in one night. Do I feel bad about what I did? No, I don't. If I didn't do what I did, we would have been stuck there, being raped and beaten every day until one of us would have died. Pose was convicted of second-degree murder, possession of drug paraphernalia. I flushed the actual drugs, child pornography, pictures of us, and 23 counts of aggravated rape and 17 counts of aggravated rape against a person under 12 years of age. That last one is a death sentence where this all happened. We moved a few states over to be with our dad's parents. We hadn't seen them in almost 4 years, and for the first time in a long time, we actually felt safe. My sister, still to this day, doesn't know what I did, doesn't know that I played a big part in our mom's death. And since we never talk about either of them, it never comes up. We are both happily married now. I have 3 children, she has 2. Both of us are active members of our PTA. No one looking at us today would ever guess the hell we went through, or what I did to get us out of it. My uncle took revenge on behalf of my parents. As the title gives away, this didn't happen to me, but is the story of how my uncle avenged my parents. My parents had me when they were plenty young. They were not teens anymore, but had barely left that age bracket. My mum and dad met in college. That was also when they had me. So while my parents were in their courses, I mostly stayed with my grandparents. The whole family lives in the same area, and the college was not that far away. My parents were still young and liked to go out with friends on occasion. When the following happened, I was a few years old. On occasion, they frequented a bar. A drunk guy there groped my mum and did not take a no as a no. My dad intervened and stopped the guy, and half an hour later all seemed forgotten. The music was loud, the bar crowded, and then someone in the crowd hit my dad with an empty glass pitcher square in the face. He was bleeding profusely and collapsed. But in the press, semi-darkness and over the music, no one knew who did it. My dad got taken to the hospital. He had a broken nose and a heavy concussion. He also couldn't see who had attacked him, and his memory between the alcohol and being hit in the head was also very fuzzy. Of course, they had considered the guy who had harassed my mom, but they didn't know him, nor did they see him anywhere leading up to the moment, let alone have any evidence. So they pressed charges against unknown. But there was virtually nothing anyone could do. But then a few days later, the piece of crap that had harassed my mum approached her on campus. Turns out he was in the same college as my parents. He made a few veiled comments and left little doubt that it had been him that hit my dad in the face. And the piece of garbage let my mum know that my dad next time should mind his manners, and that the little touching he had done didn't hurt anyone and wasn't that bad. And if he wanted to do it again, he would, and maybe more. And then the piece of crap went on his merry way. My mum was horrified, of course. She went home and told my grandparents, my dad, his parents. But no one could do anything. It was a he said, she said deal after all. And my mum hadn't even gotten the guy's name. My mum cried a lot at that time and didn't know what to do. She also was afraid of going to classes or out alone. I honestly only remember that time very scarcely. I was just a little kid. But I can remember my dad in the hospital and with his broken nose. And my mum crying a lot. My dad, of course, was just as angry and humiliated as my mom. No one knew what to do. And everyone was treading on eggshells around each other. But that is where my uncle enters the stage. My uncle, my mom's brother, lived on the other side of the country. He was a pie. And he was, of course, the last to hear the full story. But the moment he heard someone had threatened his little sister, he was on his way home. After hearing the full story, my uncle knew it would likely be hard to get the guy on the harassment, the assault or the threats. Having no evidence, my uncle had my mum point the guy out from afar on campus. It took a few days to find him. But then my uncle started to stalk that piece of human filth. My uncle took sick days, all his vacation, and invested every second possible to find out everything about the harasser. My uncle even approached the pig in another bar and became drinking buddies with him. Over several weeks my uncle had uncovered all manners of illicit behavior, possession, consumption, and distribution of drugs, theft, and a few other misdemeanors and small time stuff. And my uncle could have put him away for that. But my uncle always said when asked about that if he sent the AOLA to prison, it would be for molesting my mum and hurting my dad. And that is what he did. One night while out with his new buddy drinking, my uncle made the idiot piss drunk and they landed in my uncle's motel room. He got the harasser to incriminate himself on video, rattling off a list of illegal that he was up to. My uncle had, of course, pretended to be a crook too. Among the stories AOLA told was the story of how he groped some chick and brained her dude with a pitcher of beer. Now, something needs to be said. In my country, of course, recording someone in secret is illegal and under some conditions, like if the police does it, it is not a permissible piece of evidence in court. But as a pie, my uncle knew that laws for that exactly. But paradoxically the situation is different if it is not only audio, but also video. And my uncle had the AOLA on camera confessing. The next day my uncle turned himself into the police, with all his collected evidence. Because secretly filming people was still a crime. Though the video could be used as evidence in court, as my uncle was not affiliated with the police or any other governmental agency. When the criminal trial and the civil trial were over, the AOLA got 6 years in prison and had to pay damages to my mum and dad. And my uncle got slapped with the equivalent of a $2,000 fine for secretly filming the AOLA. Money well spent, he always said. Break my phone, you'll pay for the damage. Hello wonderful people of Reddit. I have a lot of time to myself today. My friend, employer is taking the kids out for a walk, and I decided to post my own personal story of revenge here after my friend suggested it. She also insisted on helping with my username, so thanks for that. Full stop. I was always the kid people picked on at school. The girls would spread rumors about me and the boys would harass me non-stop. See, I'd always known that I wanted to be a nanny. I loved babysitting and looking after kids, so it seemed like a natural career choice for me. I made the mistake of telling this to a girl who I thought was my friend, and she proceeded to tell everyone at school. As this was perceived as feminine, I instantly became the target for bullies. There was one boy who loved to terrorize me. I'll call him Jack for the sake of this story. Jack was awful. He would follow me home, whilst throwing things at me, vandalize my schoolwork, call me disgusting names, steal my stuff, cut my hair in class, etc. I was terrified of him. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep from the fear of having to deal with him at school the next day. I blame him and his friends for the anxiety I had, and still somewhat after this day. I reached breaking point not long after Christmas when I was 15. My family never had a lot of money, but we got by. My mum had saved for ages in order to buy me my first phone. No, it wasn't the newest model, but I didn't care. I was so grateful to have my first phone, and a little guilty that my mum had gone without her new Christmas outfit and had put off fixing her own phone to buy it for me. Once the schools went back after Christmas break, Jack found out about my phone. He took it from me and proceeded to read through my messages, making fun of me for the lack of contacts and telling my mum I loved her, then threw it to the floor and stomped on it in front of his friends. I was furious. Upset and devastated, this dickhead had destroyed something that my mum had worked so hard to buy for me. I started planning my revenge. I knew through the grapevine that Jack's mum was a stay-at-home mom. His dad had a well-paid job and his mother was quite happy to stay at home with the kids, 4-year-old twin girls. I also knew, however, that she didn't get to go out much as Jack would flat out refuse to babysit, and she was pretty picky when it came to who was allowed to look after her kids. I used to babysit her friend's little boy and was pretty good at it, if I do say so myself. However, for my plan to work, I had to babysit Jack's siblings. I made a few comments here and there to the little boy's mum about wanting to get a few more babysitting jobs so I could save up some money for my mom's upcoming birthday. As luck would have it, the lady recommended me to Jack's mom, since it had been so long since she'd been able to go out with the girls. For the next few weeks I'd go to Jack's house, with the other little boy I was babysitting, and look after his little sisters. Despite Jack's awful attitude, his family were all pretty nice. His little sisters were an absolute joy to look after. Jack wasn't usually in the house, but when he was I could see that it killed him to have to be civil to me. His mum would have flipped out if he'd been horrible to me in front of her or his little sisters. They'd have quickly ratted him out. Once I decided enough time had passed, I put my plan into action. See, Jack was one of those creepy kids that liked to brag about his adult magazine stash in his bedroom. This made him cool to his friends. Never understood why, to be honest. Anyways, every time I'd babysit and put the little ones to bed, I'd sneak into his bedroom and search around. I know this is a massive invasion of privacy, but I was a stupid 15-year-old kid and I couldn't take his bullying anymore. I eventually found his stash and made a mental note that they were in a bag in his closet. I'd been observant those few weeks, so I knew that Jack's mum and dad had an unopened bottle of vodka in the fridge. They didn't drink a lot and it was only for when they were going to parties. One night, once the little ones were asleep and Jack was out with his friends, I went to the fridge, opened the bottle of alcohol and tipped about a quarter of it down the sink. His parents could afford to buy a new one, by the way. If they couldn't, I'd never have done it, and snuck up to Jack's bedroom and hid the bottle in the same bag as his stash. His parents found out about it not too long later, and, after Jack accused me of taking it, they showed up at my door. They weren't angry, because they still didn't know who had taken it, so they asked me some questions. I denied everything, but was polite and even offered to help them look for it in case it had been misplaced. They thanked me, but told me that it was fine, they'd find it. And oh boy did they find it. I was called over the next day to take the little ones to the park for an hour or so, in order for them to have a talk with Jack. They didn't like arguing in front of the twins. It had frightened them. When I got back, Jack was in his bedroom. If the noises were anything to go by, he was crying. It turns out that he'd ratted himself out. His parents found a bottle of alcohol in his room along with his adult magazines. His mother hated anything like that as she found it to be degrading to women. She humiliated him by gossiping to the neighbors about his unhealthy obsession with X. Full stop. He denied everything and accused me of planting the alcohol there. When asked why I do that, he ratted himself out by saying that it was payback for him breaking my phone. His parents flipped out. They'd had no idea their son was such a bully. They took away his phone, grounded him and made him sell his games console to pay to get my phone fixed. I had been saving up the money myself for a few weeks. His face when they made him hand me the money will stay with me forever. His parents questioned me about the bullying, eventually informing my mum as well. I'd hidden it from her and told her I dropped my phone. He got into a lot of crap at school after a few other kids came forward about the bullying they'd endured at the hands of Jack and his friends. A few of them, including Jack, got suspended. Jack's parents even made him go to the door to apologize to the people he'd tormented. I was reluctant to take the money at first, as it was way over the amount it would cost to get my phone fixed, so his parents compromised and told me to take enough to at least cover the repair cost. Needless to say, with the phone repair covered, I managed to get my mum an awesome birthday gift. I know this is really long and really badly written. I'm not a writer, so please forgive me for any errors.